W-I-N-N-I-P-E-G, Winnipeg is where you find me. W-I-N-N-I-P-E-G, Winnipeg is where you find me. Since I was a little guy, this place has always caught my eye. The winter's fun and summer's hot. Now sing along with all you've got.
Hello, and welcome to 6 Degrees of Portage in Maine, where we talk to fascinating people from Winnipeg, the city that runs on Slurpees and rock and roll. Today, we have Winnipeg legend, Bea Broda. Bea, how are you?
I am doing just great. As you can see, I'm sleeveless, so I'm probably a little further than 6 degrees from Portage in Maine, but missing Winnipeg still.
So where did you grow up in Winnipeg? Or did you
Well,
grow up in Winnipeg?
when I was born, the first number of years were along Kildonan Drive in East Kildonan area.
Okay.
And then we moved out to an acreage, which is now known as Sage Creek, Island Lake, Sage Creek. So it was the outskirts of town. So I was one of those school bus kids and went into Windsor Park Collegiate. And then I eventually went on to the University of Manitoba, where I started in fine arts, but ended up with a degree in psychology. And then, of course, ultimately ended up doing television and travel shows. So, but it all fits because in there, I used to play piano in dining rooms and lounges, which some may remember. I was at the Holiday Inn for a long time, and the North Star Inn and at the Assiniboine Garden Inn. And whenever I had a piano bar, people would gather around the piano, and it had a tendency to be the same people. It was like it was their second living room. So I think if I ever used my psychology degree, it would have been at that time. So it didn't go to waste.
So were you like a drama kid, a theater kid, or just because you play piano, you were in that genre?
Well, actually, my mom, as a hobby, got us to take actually tap dancing lessons at 3, and ballet at 4, and piano at 5, and choir at 6. So it's just something that you did on the side. In my family, it wasn't something that you aspired to or desired. So it's just something that you would do on the side of your academic achievements. So I was not a theater kid or drama kid in any way. It's something that I had wanted for a long time. And getting a TV show was something that was really out of left field. But I'm so happy that it happened. It's every now and again, it seems the universe will just come in and go, and it's like amazing. And so you can either take it and do something with it or not realize that this is your opportunity. So I kind of did see it as my opportunity, and I've been very grateful all the way through that it started in that little station in that old Safeway store at CKND in Winnipeg.
Yeah. So we were talking before I hit record, and I was actually on your show way back when. And I'm sure if somebody can find a clip of that, it's comedy gold. But then you came across my feed, and I remembered, hey, I was on Bea's show. Maybe she'd like to be on this show. So, and thankfully you said yes. So how did the TV opportunity come to you?
Oh boy. So at the time, actually, I was in fine arts before I ended up transferring to psychology. And one of the jobs I had in fine arts was designing in the garment industry, amongst other things like designing tombstones. But when I designed in the garment industry, I felt that there was a shortage of dresses in Winnipeg. So I was going to start a factory, but I thought, well, I'm going to start a retail store first to take the pulse of the public and see what they're looking for. So I started up a dress shop, and it ended up being 3 dress shops on Portage and Vaughan, and then Portage and Edmonton. And then I had a bargain outlet where we were selling the clothes by the pound. It was sort of where they weren't going in the store, so let's just move them along. And in that time, I started playing piano because actually, to tell you the truth, I met Pat Riordan, the very famous comedian in Winnipeg, and we started going out. And his best friend was Terry Morris. So Terry had a studio downtown, and his wife at the time, Rita Jameson, had a dance studio. And Pat was going to see Terry, and I just was plunking on the piano in the next room. And all of a sudden, his head comes around and says, "How would you like to start at the North Star Inn in 3 weeks?" And I, with my whatever grade piano, I
Hmm.
wasn't a piano player per se, but I said yes. So 3 weeks later, I made my debut
Hmm.
at the North Shore Inn at the Park Lane dining room, and I did that for 6 nights a week for 8 years, believe it or not. But because of Pat, I knew that Lorraine Mansbridge was going to be leaving Manitoba morning, and
Hmm.
I thought, well, wouldn't this be a fun thing to do? So I said to Pat, geez, how can this happen? How can we make this happen? And so
Hmm.
he knew some of the people at CKND and called them up and he said he has this, gal that can do some TV work and would you like to audition her? So I went in. I did a little interview with David Lawrence. I read the
Hmm.
news. I invented a commercial, and I went back to university that day, threw my books in the locker, and thought, well, at least I gave that a shot. But I really sucked. So the next day, lo and behold, the phone rang, and I was asked to come the next day to watch the show, the morning show, Manitoba Morning, and the next day to host it. And I stayed there for 5 years doing Manitoba Morning, CKND Magazine, the weather on the 6 o'clock news, and
Hmm.
whatever else that one did as a TV personality. So it's one of those times, like I was saying, the universe just comes and just goes, and
Hmm.
you either use it or you don't. And I took that as a huge change of trajectory that came to me really as a fluke because I
Hmm.
hadn't trained for it or particularly wanted it all that long. But there it was, and my career has been in television since 1981, and it all
Hmm.
started there where we did everything at CKND. Sometimes I would clip the microphone on a guest and they would say, "Ah," at CBC, they'd be walking out. So,
Hmm.
so it was nice that we could do everything. Like I
Hmm.
found the guests for the show. I
Hmm.
was the producer, I was the host. And I've kind of carried that along through the
Hmm.
years and very much appreciate those days. And I'm still in contact. And I'll tell you one funny thing in
Hmm.
town right here now. I'm in Palm Springs, California in the winter. My very first guest on my very first show is in town on a 2-week vacation. And we just
Nice.
had lunch yesterday.
Hmm. Well, I
And
guess when you
that's
have that on-screen charisma like you do, I mean, people can pick it up.
that's nice. But I did it for 5 years, and after a while, it just seems like the same things are rolling around. And
Hmm.
and while you appreciate your job, you kind of feel that there's something more. So I moved to Toronto, and the first job I got, other than doing small things like I was in Three Men and a Baby as
Ooh.
one of the girls in the Bachelor scenes at the beginning, and
Hmm.
commercials and stuff like that. The first job I auditioned for and got was for a travel show called Discover Your World. And at the beginning, I was just the in-studio host, and I had to
Hmm.
watch the traveling host, David Crichton, on location in wonderful places, and just throw to him. But one day he couldn't make it, so they sent me. And so the first time, my first trip on that show was to the Bahamas. And when I was just like my legs were dangling from the front of the boat, hopping along the Caribbean Sea, I thought, Eureka! This is what I want. TV plus travel
Hmm.
equals me. And then I also can't argue with fortune cookies. And right here, I was reminded I have this stuck to my lamp. This little one is stuck to my lamp. It says, "You will step on the soil of many countries." So, I couldn't fight it.
Hmm. Did anyone
Mm.
else in your family have a travel bug?
Well, to tell you the truth, my mom enjoyed
Hmm.
traveling far and wide. She would go
Hmm.
in the 70s to Russia and Hong Kong and the Philippines and the Arctic and all over the place. And in fact, there was one of my shows where my mom had just come back from the Arctic and
Hmm.
she had so many pictures and so many stories that I invited her to be a guest on my show. And then she
Hmm.
showed like pennies up against lichen, and so you could see the size of it. And the
Hmm.
interview went so well that CKND reran it on the 6 o'clock and 11 o'clock news because it was a really interesting piece. She was a
Hmm.
history and geography teacher, so She came back
Okay.
by it rather honestly. She loved to travel and nothing scared her at all.
I
So, my
imagine
dad.
I
Hmm?
imagine traveling back then was a lot more difficult. The cameras you had to schlep and stuff like that. Today, you just take your phone.
Yes, well, I still have a lot of gear because
Hmm.
for it to be the right resolution for TV broadcast quality acceptance, it still has to be a pretty high resolution. But it's definitely much lighter. I can remember the first times in those days in the late 80s,
Hmm.
the camera and the player were separate. And then the tripod, you had one person just to carry this great big tripod, and
Hmm.
batteries were an issue. So, and then even countries to accept these things into the countries, that was one of the hardest parts. And getting an ATA carnet and filling it all out and getting through customs with all this equipment. So from that standpoint, it's all gotten incredibly lot easier. But having
Hmm.
said that, back in those days, I think when I started the travel shows as opposed to the studio, it was 3/4 inch. And then it got to
Hmm.
Betacam and Betacam SP and then digital. And it just skyrocketed since I've been
Hmm.
doing this. But just one little more funny aside is I went to the 30th anniversary party of Global in Winnipeg back when
Hmm.
it was. And they created a little museum room, and my camera from Manitoba Morning was in the museum. So,
Did they make you play piano?
so every time a guest didn't turn up, the guys
Hmm.
would quickly roll in the piano and I'd play for that segment. And I would have women call in and say, "Oh, the next time your guest doesn't show up, can you play Dr. Zhivago?" So yes, I did do that.
Do you have like a crazy custom story that you were possibly a little bit fearful of what was going to happen and
Well, probably the one that sent the most tingles up and down my spine was once filming in Argentina. And it
Mhm.
wasn't that long after the Falkland, Wars. And I was on a cruise ship with my ex-husband and a camera person from Sunquest Vacations. And we could see the ship there and we could see a pier over here. So we thought if we could get to the end of this pier, we could get a perfect shot of the ship. So I
Mhm.
climbed up over a fence and we all climbed up, walked over to the end of the pier. And it turns out we jumped into a submarine base. And that's not done in Argentina, even at the best of times. So
Mhm.
before long, there were people with these rifles coming towards us, and we had no language in common. In those
Mhm.
days, I didn't have a word of Spanish. They didn't have a word of English. They were young and volatile human beings. So it was
Mhm.
nerve-wracking. So they kind of motioned for us to go in their direction, and so they marched along, and then there was one in behind me with the rifle with machine gun, right in behind my back as
Oh
we
my
walked
God.
to took take me to your leader. So and then what we did was I had the microphone. In those days, you had a microphone. It wasn't clipped
Mhm.
to your lapel. It was a microphone. So, we just pointed to the ship and, la, 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 la. And they believed us. So they walked us all the way back to precisely the point where we had jumped in the fence and we
Mhm.
jumped back over. And there's a joke that they wanted to see under my dress, but I think it was not quite like that. But that was
Well,
scary. That was scary, I have to say, because you just didn't know what was going to
mhm.
happen. And also, the submarines weren't in very good condition. So, I mean, we
Mhm.
were in a position to tell people those submarines need help.
Yeah.
But I've
I'm
had other
amazed
things.
that war as it was, it should have never happened for one thing, but
There's
it's
a number like that, that's for sure.
yeah, I think a couple are currently going on but we don't want to delve into politics.
I
So,
know we don't, but one thing I'd like to talk about is that, again, as you travel, you learn so many things from so many people. And I'd love
mhm.
to say that I've got like a sister in every port. Like I have lots
Mhm.
of people that I can call upon everywhere. But
Mhm.
one group that I got involved with quite a bit, two groups now. One, the Society of American Travel Writers, which has a
Mhm.
Canadian chapter, and I was chair of it twice, and then became the president of the whole enchilada. And then through my work with them, I met IIPT, which is the International Institute for Peace Through Tourism. So
Okay.
both of those groups, have very high standards and ethics, and are certainly, especially IIPT, in search of peace and understanding that travel is a force for good in the
Hmm.
world. And in fact, I was just in Turkey. I just got back a few days ago from Istanbul. And it was an SATW convention. And in there, we have professional development and keynote speakers. And the two that we had, one was a Palestinian, and the other one was an Israeli, a Jew. And the first
Hmm.
thing they did before they started speaking was hug. And then they started talking about what they do is they share stories. They don't boycott. They go in and share stories. And that's one of the things that can truly alleviate tensions and
Hmm.
create peace. So that's just an aside. So not politics, but
Hmm.
but world relations.
For sure. I live in a very ethnic neighborhood in Thornhill. Um,
Ah,
and it's amazing. Like I think it's predominantly Jewish, but
mhm.
there's so many new immigrants here that I'm sort of shocked by the fact that there were almost no kids trick or treating because it's not
Oh,
from their culture, right? It's
right.
a British or North American thing. And
Mhm.
there's almost no Christmas lights, which I would expect in a Jewish neighborhood, but because also these people come from areas of the world that don't have the festive Christmas or they don't do Christmas.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
but everybody gets along.
Oh, that's great. Good old
Yeah.
Toronto.
Hmm.
I
Is
lived
that
in
where you're
Toronto
based?
for, I called it home for 38 years.
Hmm.
And just last fall, I decided to make the move over to Vancouver. So I started in Winnipeg, moved east and now west. And part of the
Hmm.
reason is because I'm also in California. And to be truthful, I was finding it very difficult to transport my two cats cross continent twice a year. You can only take one cat, and the other
Hmm.
one has to go into cargo. And with the months that I move around, there's a heat embargo, so it just
Hmm.
was just getting very difficult. So
Hmm.
I have only been in Vancouver one summer, but I miss Toronto. I visited for a week this summer and I was already looking at condos right next door to where I was. So
Hmm.
Toronto's a
Well,
great city, but so is Vancouver. It's just I need to give it a bit of a chance.
hmm, you were having a bit of a catastrophe.
Yes, I
Sorry.
was.
So,
Oh.
so from all your travels, is there one piece of culture or belief system that you've actually been able to bring back and integrate into your lifestyle?
Well, I'd have to say that, you really, in a way, have to distill all of them. You know,
Hmm.
I have been to India. I actually was just in the Blue Mosque in Istanbul, and I picked up
Hmm.
a little booklet. They had booklets in every language. One of them was about dying, and one of them was about being sick. And
Hmm.
it's just an interesting perspective there about how if you're sick, it's going to prolong your life. So I thought
Hmm.
that's interesting. There was 25 or 26 reasons to be thankful for sickness. And
Hmm.
and they said because most people just go through blithely and they don't think about it until they're at the end. But if you get sick early, suddenly the minutes become years. It extends your life. And then you
Hmm.
for sure want to do everything that's valuable, for the rest of your life, something that's
Hmm.
meaningful. So that's what I pulled from that culture, which I'd never felt before. And of course Hinduism. I've always loved Hinduism, the sights, the smells. I'm allergic to onions, so I know I can go into a Hare Krishna temple and get a meal that's not going to have onions in it because they don't believe in onions and garlic actually in food because it interferes with spirit. So,
That's
but
so interesting because other cultures think, if you put garlic and onions in your shoes or whatever, it pulls out disease.
That's or yeah, that garlic is going to keep the devils away.
Hmm.
But no, in Hinduism, the spicy stuff, anything aromatic is going to stand in the way between you and spirit. And of course, I've always loved Buddhism. You know, it's just
Hmm.
so very peaceful. And you know, I
Hmm.
love to do Bikram yoga, and I don't know, I think little bits and pieces of everything. I
Hmm.
can't say that I'm of a belief system other than my own. And I personally believe that there are as many ways to the top of the mountain as there are people. That's just a belief system I think I've always had, but can
Hmm.
probably define that better. I think on my Facebook page, I think I write that I understand that all of the, you know, the tributaries and rivers lead to one sea.
Hmm.
So I think whatever it is that's good for you is the one that you should be supported in. So,
Hmm.
and having said that, one thing you may not know is that I was a spiritualist minister for 6 years. So in
Okay.
Toronto, and the services were held on Sunday evening because
Hmm.
anybody could practice anything they do, and there's nothing going on Sunday evening, so they could come to the spiritualist church, and usually it was some sort of a trauma that brought people through the door, and then
Hmm.
they, you know, stayed for years often. So, and my leaving Toronto is sort of what ended that. You know, you really
Hmm.
need to be full time for something like that.
Well, I think
I,
it's generally a trauma of some sort that sends people on alternative life paths. You know, whether they become more religious or a fitness nut or anything like that, or, you know, get into a charity. It's usually some sort of trauma or life altering event.
Sure. Yeah, I agree with that. And I can't remember if we were talking about it before we started recording, but I was
Hmm.
mentioning that, I mean, I just finished season 5 of Out of Town
Hmm.
Adventures, my show that runs on Amazon Prime in English speaking countries. And it's in 6 or 7 languages throughout Europe. And it's on SBS in Australia, and it's around. But
Hmm.
starting season 6 for sure, because there are many more countries I'd like to see. But I'm also embarking on a documentary, not sure if it's going to be a limited series or what, called The
Hmm.
Great Beyond. And it's going to be all of the, not just cultural perspectives of what happens to us when we die, but individual ones. You know, when someone is actually facing that end, that curtain,
Hmm.
what do
Been
they
there,
think?
done
What do
that.
they? Yeah, yes. So that's why I was saying to you that I would like you to be on that show.
Sure. I'm actually in discussions right now. There's a new documentary channel that's starting up. It's
Oh.
the same guys that created the original documentary channel, and they sold it off, and now they're starting it again because they see there's another need. So possibly we should connect you with them.
Oh, that's a great idea.
So
But I'm
little
glad that you
plugs.
connected with me at all. It was one of those nice little emails I got asking me to be
How
on your podcast. And I
how
must
many
now listen to
countries
them.
do you think you've been to?
Well, there are 196 sovereign countries, and I have been to just over 100. And the ones that are missing are there's many in Africa. So I've only
Hmm.
been to about 5 or 6 in Africa. So those ones I really must get to.
Hmm.
So, you know, and don't ask me what's my favorite because I find that there's something wonderful about all of them. You know, it
Hmm.
depends on what you're looking for. I find
Sure.
anything in Europe to be very comfortable and luxurious and fascinating. But I love being in the Middle East and feeling, you know, like it, you might have felt 2,500 years ago. And one of the things I'm most thankful about is that I got to see many of these places as far back as the 80s. So, you know, when nobody was at Machu Picchu, you know,
Hmm.
nobody was at Stonehenge. You know, you could still, when my dad first took me to Paris, my first trip, the Mona Lisa was just hanging on the wall. And then the
Hmm.
next time it had like a plexiglass covering. And then the next time it's got bars and a lineup. So, and also the first time I went to China in the 80s, you could stand in Shanghai and see across the Bund a rice field as far as the eye can see. Now you look across and there's New York City on steroids, steroids.
Mhm.
It is so huge, that it would have happened in that short time is
Mhm.
incredible. So I'm happy to have seen how things have changed and been there
Mhm.
before over tourism, which is something we all have to think about.
Sure. So, have you ever been to any place that sort of reminds you of it's like the Winnipeg of that country or that territory?
I'd have to say Milwaukee would be like a Winnipeg.
Uh-huh.
A lot of the places are just a little bit too foreign, I think, to
Hmm.
remind me. Like I could almost think of something in like New Zealand, but it's
Hmm.
not the same. The foliage isn't the same. But
Right.
I guess there's some American cities that are like that.
Hmm.
But
So,
Milwaukee coming to mind. In fact, I put Milwaukee and Winnipeg together on one show in, I think, season 4.
okay.
You know why? Because Milwaukee's got the fawns. Winnipeg has
Hmm.
Winnie the Pooh. They both have
Right.
lived their lives around the rivers.
Hmm.
There was just so many things in common
Hmm.
that it was a wonderful complement.
And we used to have a whole bunch of breweries in Winnipeg. Not so many anymore, but
No, eh? Hmm.
yeah. So
I
that was
can't
one
say
of
I
my
follow.
jobs. One of my summer jobs. I worked at the old Carling O'Keefe Brewery. That
And
was
it's gone?
yeah, that was an experience of alcoholism at its limits. Oh my God, could those guys drink? So,
Yes, I think Manitoba's a little bit known for that. And one
mhm.
one thing I'll tell you though is on my license plate here, I've got a Winnipeg Jets plate.
Oh,
I've
yay.
always been a fan of the Winnipeg Jets. I've got them ornaments on my Christmas tree.
Hmm.
I've got everything Winnipeg
Hmm.
Jets, even though I was in Toronto for 38 years and I'm in Vancouver now. So
Hmm.
it's just something that never really leaves you or never left me.
Oh, the same. I cannot cheer for the Toronto Maple Leafs. I just can't. So it's Jets or nothing. So, are there any cities that you would recommend to people that, okay, you can go there once, you can go there twice, but you really should do this like 3 or 4 times to really get the full shot?
Well, there's a lot of cities like that. And one example that where I just was Istanbul. I've been there
Hmm.
3 times now, and I feel like I'm just now getting my bearings on how that
Hmm.
city works and just peeling the layers back. Another one would be Glasgow. There's a lot
Hmm.
more. In fact, all of the main Scottish cities, Edinburgh, there's a lot more than where they just kind of take you. That if you just go a little bit further or meet some people that take you somewhere. You
Hmm.
can find many cities that have those sorts of layers. London would be, ridiculous, and Rome, where you see the Vatican, you see the Spanish Stairs, but there's so much more. There's so many little pizza places tucked in.
Hmm.
So I would say it'd be nice to give most cities a little bit of a break like that. Even
Okay.
Winnipeg. A lot of people give Winnipeg
Hmm.
short shrift,
Hmm.
but it's beautiful. I
Hmm.
had Julie Kavner on my show once. I don't know if that name rings a bell, but she
She
plays the
was on
voice of,
Newhart.
no, she plays the voice of Marge Simpson on The Simpsons.
Okay.
And she was on Rhoda, so she played Brenda Morgenstern. But she
Hmm.
was my guest, and she came right away saying she wants to see the forks of the Red and the Assiniboine River. So she looked into it and she just wanted to
Hmm.
be where those rivers forked. So
Hmm.
sometimes it's nice to just look into a place, like look into to Fred and find out he's died at least 20 times and come back. Who knew?
Hmm. Who knew? Not the doctors, that's for sure.
Wow. We need to talk more about that. I have to start a
Okay,
podcast.
sure. So, would you have like 2 or 3 top travel tips that you could give to somebody who's just starting out?
Mm. I think probably go with your gut in terms of where you really want to go and make it
Hmm.
happen, even though it might seem impossible. One of my favorite trips has been Galapagos, and I
Oh,
think
would
that
love to go
that's
there.
should be on everyone's wish list.
Mhm.
So just to make it possible. I don't know if you're asking for packing tips or
Whatever you want to
financial
share.
tips, because I'm not very good at finding the best deals.
Hmm.
You know, I'm not really one to ask for that. Um, I could say if you're going long distances, there's a little homeopathic remedy called no jet lag. And I would
Okay.
take that. I would recommend that highly. Because if you take that every 2 hours, or if you sleep, it's okay if you take it every 4 hours. You'll actually wake up at the other end without jet lag. And so that saves you a lot on the other end so that you can start
Hmm.
enjoying your trip. And then I would recommend that you try and stick to that time zone as much as you
Hmm.
possibly can right from the start. So that's another good tip.
Hmm.
Also, one thing that we've been talking about again with IIPT and SATW is that we should go to the place. The place shouldn't have to come to us. And so far, tourism has been reaching out to us. But if we reached out to that community, you know, to get to know it, so that it wasn't that
Hmm.
we were expecting to be serviced, but we got to understand and learn something about their local culture,
Hmm.
then it would be a far more enriching experience for both sides.
Oh, for sure. Having that natural curiosity makes all the difference in the world.
Sharing
And
our
I,
stories.
yeah, exactly. So unfortunately, B, we're almost out of time. So could you give the audience a reminder of your TV show and if people want to get hold of you, how they can get hold of you?
Oh, sure, that's great. Well, the show is called Out of Town Adventures. OUTTA, Town Adventures. And it's on Amazon Prime Video in English speaking
Hmm.
countries. There's 4 seasons up there now, and season 5 is going to be delivered very, very shortly. And if you want to give me a shout, my email address is bea@bcpictures.com. And I do keep a website, but I don't keep it well enough, but it's outoftownadventures.tv.
Hmm. That's how I found you. But I think you
Yes,
also
you
have
do.
an Instagram as well, don't
Yes,
you?
I'm
And Facebook.
Instagram at Bea Broda, and that's where
So
Facebook is too.
yeah. So is B short for anything or
Yes, it is
okay.
Beatrice.
Oh, okay. That's a nice name.
It's a good regal name, but I
Hmm.
prefer Bea.
Okay. So one last question. Um, are you related to the hockey player, Kirk Broda?
So I have a little story there too. In the
Okay.
60s, he came around in Winnipeg to find his roots because he was from Brandon.
Hmm.
And he spoke to my mother. And no matter what they talked about, they could find nothing in common. So he said, let's be 26th cousins. So I'm 27th cousins with Turk Broda.
That's amazing.
No relation that we know of.
Okay. I think, yeah, maybe the names changed as people emigrated and immigrated. So who knows? But thing is, you both became stars.
Aw. Well, I really appreciate your invitation to speak on your podcast, and let's stay in touch.
Okay, we'll do that. Thank you so much. And to the audience, thank you for tuning in. Please like, subscribe, share, comment, go visit Bee's websites, watch her show on Prime, and have yourself an amazing week. Bye bye.
Thanks, Fred.